Give me a second. Send a notice out. All right, and then check to make sure we are streaming. Yes, we are live. Okay. Very good. Very, very good. Hold on a second. Okay, everything seems to be working. All right, so we're going to chant now. Let's see what we can chant. We're back at home. Let's chant Oh Hey Vaishnava Thakur. Oh hey Vaishnava Thakur, Yara Sagare say Guri, Diyapada Jaya, Shodaya Maya, Nomara Charana Dori, Diyapada Jaya, Shodaya Maya, Nomara Charana Dori, Jaya Begatami, Dosha Shoni, Jaya Guna Devo Nase, Jaya Begatami, Yato Soni, Jaya Guna Devo Nase, Jaya Satsanga, Deho Amare, Osachi Sangira, Jaya Satsanga, Deho Amare, Osachi Sangira. Nikaki Amara, Boibu, Adinama, Sankirtane. Nikaki Amara, Boibu, Adinama, Sankirtane. To me creep a gory, Shaka Vindudiya, Deho Krishna Damadame. To me creep a gory, Shaka Vindudiya, Deho Krishna Damadame. Krishna say tomorrow, tomorrow, Sukani Krishna say tomorrow, Krishna tomorrow, tomorrow, Sukani Jayatava Amito Kangala Krishna Krishna Bole Jayatava Vaishnava Nakura Duyara Sadhu Ina Sekunda Jaya Shodaya Maya Tomara Jagannathuri Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Udipo Adipo Adimbo Adimo Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravalikacharya Also Teta Sitashi Shimad, His Divine Grace Avaya Chalanad Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Mara Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Hira Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Paramanityananda Shidwaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopi Gopinath Shyamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavanam Ki Jai Mathuram Ki Jai Jagannath Swami Ki Jai Yamunamai Ki Jai Srimati Vlasadevi Ki Jai Samavik Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya, Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste, Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharani Nivasesha Shunyavadi, Paschatya Deja Tarani. So we're going to continue with our study of Krishna book, and now we're going to start the most difficult chapter in the Krishna book, which is the prayers of the personified Vedas. And this is a very philosophical chapter, so we're going to go slowly through this chapter. So without further ado, let's go back to Krishna book. So Om Ganati Mirandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshur Meditam Yena Tasmai Shigurave Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with a torchlight of knowledge while I was blinded in the darkness of ignorance. Actually, I forgot to read the translation to this poem by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. O Venerable Vaishnava, Ocean of Mercy, be merciful unto your servant. Give me the shade of your lotus feet and purify me. I hold on to your lotus feet. Teach me to control my 6 passions, rectify my 6 faults. Bestow upon me the 6 qualities and offer unto me the 6 kinds of holy association. I do not find the strength to carry on alone the Sankirtan of the holy name of Hari. Please bless me by giving me just 1 drop of faith with which to obtain the great treasure of the holy name of Krishna. Krishna is yours, you have the power given to me. I'm simply running behind you, shouting, Krishna, Krishna. Okay, let's go to the Krishna book. Share the screen. Prayers to the personified Vedas, by the personified Vedas. And we're nearing the end of Krishna book right now, and we'll decide what we're going to do after this. Chapter 87 in the Srimad Bhagavatam or Krishna book. King Parikshit inquired from Shukadeva Goswami about a very important topic in understanding transcendental subject matter. His question was, since Vedic knowledge generally deals with the subject matter of the three qualities of the material world, how then can it approach the subject matter of transcendence, which is beyond the approach of the three material modes? Since the mind is material and the vibration of words is a material sound, how can the Vedic knowledge expressing by material sound the thoughts of the material mind approach transcendence? Description of a subject matter necessitates describing its source of emanation, its qualities, and its activities. Such description can be possible only by thinking with the material mind and by vibrating material words. Brahman, of the absolute truth, has no material qualities, but our power of speaking does not go beyond material qualities. How then can Brahman, the absolute truth, be described by your words? I do not see how it is possible to understand transcendence from such expressions of material sound. Obviously, so this is a very important question. For example, right now I'm speaking and my voice is coming from the vocal cord, which is material, and my brain, which is, it's the material world. And you're hearing through your ears, which is simply a mechanism. That's right. Your ears are simply a mechanism. You got the eardrum, and there's a whole different process of hearing, and ultimately the sound vibration is transmitted to your brain. And the brain is material. So how can you understand something, or how can you explain something that is transcendental using material means? That's a really important question. This is to help us understand. And of course, the Vedas also mainly deal with the three modes of nature, as Krishna states in the Bhagavad Gita, Trigunya Vishya Veda, Nish Trigunya Vavarjuna, Nirdvandvo Nitya Nishnashtapasto, Yogic Shema Atmavan. He says to Arjuna, the Vedas mainly deal with three modes of nature, but you should transcend this. So the purpose of King Parikshit's inquiry was to ascertain from Shukadeva Goswami whether the Vedas ultimately describe the absolute truth as impersonal or as personal. Understanding the absolute truth progresses in three features: impersonal Brahman, Paramatma, localized in everyone's heart, and at last, the supreme personality of God in Krishna. And of course, ultimately, we understand because Krishna is a person, okay, and he is the absolute controller of everything. He has absolute control. He can do anything he wants. He can transform matter to spirit. That's right. That's why we have the vibration of the Hare Krishna mantra, which is not different from Krishna, which is apparently being vibrated by our mundane tongues and heard by our mundane ears, but it's spiritual. And somehow or other, Krishna does that because Krishna has a limited power to do anything. He's aptakama. Anyway, so in other words, the example Prabhupada gives is like an electrician who can take electrical energy, make it cool or make it heat, simply by the design of the machine. In fact, the same machine could either heat or cool. You have these reverse cycle air conditioners, or what you call in America, heat pumps. The Vedas deal with the three departments of activities. One is called karma kanda, or activities under the Vedic injunction, which gradually purify one to understand his real position. And also, the karma kanda section enables one to progress materially, to enjoy things in this material world. It's not really focused that much on self-realization. It's focused more or less on encouraging people to at least accept a higher authority, and ultimately that higher authority is Krishna, and of course under Krishna the demigods, but at least accept a higher authority, the laws of God, and function on that higher authority. So it's actually a step towards transcendence, although it's not transcendence, but it's preliminary to transcendence. The next is Jnana Kanda, the process of understanding the absolute truth by speculative methods. And the third is Upasana Kanda, or worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and sometimes of the demigods also. The worship of the demigods is recommended in the Vedas. Is ordered with the understanding of the demigod's relationship to the personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has many parts and parcels. Some are called Swamsas, or his personal expansions. That's the Vishnu Tattva expansions of God, like Balaram, like Nrsimha Bhagavan. Got it? Like Pradyumna and Niruddha. And some are called Vivinamshas, the living entities. That's like you or me. I am not Swamsha. I am Vivinamsha. That is my category. All such expansions, both Swamshas and Vivinamshas, are emanations from the original personality of Godhead. Swamsa expansions are called Vishnu Tattva. That's what I just said. Whereas the Vivinamsha expansions are called Jiva Tattva. That means the individual soul. The different demigods are Jiva Tattva, except Lord Shiva, who is a special Tattva, special category. Sometimes called Shiva Tattva. Anyway, he's in a special category of his own. He's not Vishnu Tattva, he's not Jiva Tattva. And also, so he's a demigod. But in addition to the demigod, you have the energies of Krishna, which are Shaktis. So that's Shakti Tattva. So you got Jiva Tattva, basically you have Jiva Tattva, Vishnu Tattva, Shakti Tattva, and just Shiva Tattva, which is a special category. So you have about four. And also you have, Shakti Tattva, because from the Shakti Tattva expands the material energy, which is the Maya Shakti, or the Mahamaya Shakti. The conditioned souls are generally put into the activities of the material world for sense gratification. Therefore, it's stated in the Bhagavad Gita to regulate those who are very much addicted to different kinds of sense gratification. The worship of demigods is sometimes recommended. For example, for persons very much addicted to meat eating, the Vedic injunction recommends that after worshiping the form of the goddess Kali and sacrificing a goat, not any other animal, certainly not a cow, under karma kanda regulation, the worshippers may be allowed to eat meat. Actually, when they offer on the full moon day the meat to the goddess of Kali, and the goddess Kali doesn't eat meat, it's her associates who eat meat. They have to whisper in the goat's ear, Mamsa Hanati. In other words, you will eat meat. That's what that mantra means. Because in the future, the goat will become a human being. The goat will be the person who has killed him in this life. The idea is not to encourage one to eat meat, but to allow one who insists on eating meat to eat it under certain restricted conditions. Therefore, worship of the demigods is not worship of the absolute truth, but by worshiping the demigods, one gradually comes to accept the Supreme Personality of God in an indirect way. It's something like, let's say, being overawed when one looks at the stars at night and think, oh, everything's so great, and feeling awe and reverence. So it encourages one to take another step forward. This indirect acceptance is described in Bhagavad Gita as avidhi. Avidhi means not bona fide. Since demigod worship is not bona fide, the impersonalist stress concentrate on the impersonal feature of the absolute truth. King Parikshit's question was, which is the ultimate target of Vedic knowledge, the concentration on the impersonal feature of the absolute truth, or the concentration on the personal feature? Because if you have the impersonal feature, the impersonal feature cannot be described with words. How do you describe it? I mean, you could say it's unlimited, it's great, it's bright. It is what it is. I am that I am, the diplomacy, so you don't really have a clear conception. But with a personal feature, we have a clear conception. So after all, both the impersonal and the personal feature of the Supreme Lord are beyond our material conception. The impersonal feature of the Absolute, the Brahman effulgence, but the rays of the personal body of Krishna, these rays of the personal body of Krishna are cast all over the creation of the Lord. And the portion of the effulgence which is covered by the material cloud is called the created cosmos of the three material qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. How can persons who are within this clouded portion called the material world conceive of the absolute truth by the speculative method? You can't. As the Brahma Samhita says, if you travel at the speed of the mind for an unlimited amount of time, you can't even reach the end of this universe. What to speak of piercing the coverings of this universe, what to speak of entering the spiritual world and arriving at the lotus feet of Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. The only way you can do that is to cultivate the bhakti lata bija. That means through devotion, love, Krishna, Yadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, Yenamahamopiyantite. Krishna actually gives you the understanding. Not simply by studying, but by Krishna revealing to you. Naham Prakasha Sarvasya Yogamaya Samavata, Buddhiyam Navajanati. For those who are actually not devotees, Krishna doesn't reveal. They can read the Vedic literatures, Vedeshu Durlavam Adurlavam Atma Bhakto, but they will never understand a whit about Krishna. And then, in answering King Parikshit's question, Shukadeva Goswami replied that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has created the mind, senses, and living force of the living entity for the purpose of sense gratification and transmigration from one body to another, as well as for the purpose of allowing liberation from the material conditions. In other words, one can utilize the senses, mind, and living force for sense gratification and transmigration from one body to another, or for the matter of liberation. In other words, Krishna personally, he's a person, he created these senses for whatever we want to use them for. That's up to us. The Vedic injunctions are there just to give the conditioned souls the chance for sense gratification under regulative principles. In other words, you restrict yourself. People are going to engage in sense gratification, so they should engage it in sense gratification in such a way that they don't commit big karmic activities and further entangle themselves in this world, and thereby also give them the chance for promotion to higher conditions of life. Ultimately, if the consciousness is purified, one comes to its original position, goes back home, back to Godhead. The living entity is intelligent. One therefore has to utilize his intelligence over the mind and the senses. So we understand this. The subtle body. The gross body is earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And the subtle body is the mind, intelligence, and false ego. So intelligence, when you have the right desire, is focused on becoming Krishna conscious. And when you have no wrong desire, then Krishna, Krishna gives you intelligence how to go away from him. Depends on your desire. So everything is dependent on desire. The whole material creation is built on the desire of the living entity. Your entanglement is built upon the desire, and that's mentioned in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. When the mind and senses are purified by the proper use of intelligence, then the conditioned soul is liberated. Otherwise, if the intelligence is not properly utilized in controlling the senses and mind, the conditioned soul continues to transmigrate from one kind of body to another simply for sense gratification. Another point clearly stated in the answer of Shukadeva Goswami is that it is the mind, senses, and intelligence of the individual living entity that the Lord created. It is not stated that the living entities themselves were ever created. Really important statement. We're eternal. Just as the shining particles of the sun rays always exist within the sun, the living entities exist eternally as parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But just as the sun rays are sometimes covered by a cloud, which is created by the sun, so the conditioned souls, although eternally existing as parts of the Supreme Lord, are sometimes put within the cloud of the material concept of life in the darkness of ignorance. That's us. The whole Vedic process is to alleviate that darkened condition. Ultimately, when the senses and mind of the conditioned being are fully purified, he comes to his original position called Krishna consciousness, and that is liberation. So Prabhupada said his original position. Okay, you got it. That means originally he was there. In the Vedanta Sutra, the first sutra code questions about the absolute truth. What is the nature of the absolute truth? Also means now is the time to look for the absolute truth. The next sutra answers that the nature of the absolute truth is that he is the source of everything. It's from which everything comes, or from whom everything comes. Whatever we experience, even in this material condition of life, is but an emanation from him, as Krishna. The absolute truth created the mind, senses, and intelligence. That means that the absolute truth is not without mind, intelligence, and senses. In other words, because there's variegatedness in this material world, that variegatedness had to be created by a person. Variegatedness does not come about, or at least design does not come about by accident. If you have accidents, things fall apart, entropy. In other words, he is not impersonal. The very word created means that he is transcendental intelligence. For example, when a father begets a child, the child has senses because the father also has senses. The child is born with hands and legs because the father also has hands and legs. In other words, because Krishna has these particular senses, active and perceptive, we can understand because we have these things, we can understand the source of ourselves must have those things and more. Got it? You don't have a emanation with more qualities, more variegatedness than that from which it emanated from. Sometimes it is said that man is made after the image of God. The absolute truth is therefore the Supreme Personality with transcendental mind, senses, and intelligence. When one's mind, senses, and intelligence are purified of material contamination, one can understand the original feature of the absolute truth as a person. In other words, one's mind becomes spiritual. Shuddha Habimana, Habihama, E Rabo, Sri Vrindavanam. The Vedic process is to promote the conditioned soul gradually from the mode of ignorance to the mode of passion, and from the mode of passion to the mode of goodness. And that's the Varnashram does the same thing too. That's part of the Vedic system. In the mode of goodness, there's sufficient light for understanding things as they are. For example, from earth a tree grows, from the wood of the tree a fire is ignited. In that igniting process, we first of all find smoke, and the next stage is heat, and then fire. A really important example there. That is gradual elevation. When there's actually fire, we can utilize it for various purposes. Therefore, fire is the ultimate goal. So the mode of goodness is the place from which you can jump off into the spiritual realm. Generally, you cannot jump off to the spiritual realm from passion, and certainly not from ignorance. Unless, of course, you get special blessings by a pure devotee like Narada Muni and Magrari. I mean, these are exceptional cases. But generally, you have to be in the mode of goodness and cultivate the mode of goodness. Just like, all right, give an example. Like if you want to take an airplane, you have to go to the airport. Now, there may be some exceptions where they have a helicopter that lands in your backyard. That's not very common. But generally, you have to go to the airport. But going to the airport is not enough. Being in the mode of goodness is not enough. But in logical terms, it is necessary, but it is not sufficient. And if you don't understand what I just said about logical terms, you can look it up later after class. Similarly, in the gross material stage of life, the quality of ignorance is very prominent. Dissipation of this ignorance takes place in the gradual progress of civilization from the barbarian stage of civilized life. And when one comes to the stage of civilized life, he is said to be in the mode of passion. In the barbarian stage, or in the mode of ignorance, like Tarzan, me Tarzan, you Jane, the senses are gratified in a very crude way, whereas in the mode of passion or civilized life, the senses are gratified in a polished manner. So like in ignorance, people will just have illicit life with wherever they get attracted to. You know, like gorillas. That's true. Some men act like gorillas. Some ladies act like gorillides, if there's such a word, female gorillas, obviously. So that's, grunting. It's like, the sporting games are like that too. They're pretty much in ignorance. And there's some passion there. Not complete ignorance, or else people will be completely sleeping and nobody would win the sporting game. No one would win the World Cup. So anyway, the senses are gratified in a polished manner. Polished manner means instead of, just like, just like grunting at someone, a man just having a relationship with a woman, they get married. That's mode of passion. But when one is promoted to the mode of goodness, one can understand that the senses and the mind are engaged in material activities only being due to being covered by perverted consciousness. So, of course, in the mode of goodness, one may get married too, but for a higher purpose, not just to enjoy the senses. Like Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was married, but to have Krishna conscious children. Or many of the Prajapatis that are mentioned in the Bhagavatam, they were married to have Krishna conscious children. It depends on one's motivation, but the mode of passion, then the motivation is sense gratification, but in a more sophisticated way, in a regulated way, sorry. When this perverted consciousness is gradually transformed in Krishna consciousness, and the path of liberation is open. So it is not that one is unable to approach the absolute truth by the senses and the mind. The conclusion is rather that the senses, mind, intelligence in the growth stage of contamination cannot appreciate the nature of the absolute truth. But when purified, the senses, mind, and intelligence can understand what the absolute truth is. The purifying process is called devotional service or Krishna consciousness. Sometimes Prabhupada would describe that we have spiritual senses and they are covered. And Prabhupada would sometimes use the example in this regard, and everyone should learn this example, of a glove. The glove fits over the hand. Hand, in this particular metaphor, is the original thing. And then the glove fits over the hand. And when you are using a glove, depending upon the thickness of the glove, and now we're talking about the modes of nature, goodness, passion, or ignorance, you can feel things to a certain degree, but not to the same degree that you would if the glove was removed. So it's like that. And this glove, this body is a glove, basically. We can experience certain things that, depending upon how much covered we are, we can understand things either as they are, or almost as they are, or very far from where they are, etc. Interesting example. The Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly stated that the purpose of Vedic knowledge is to understand Krishna. And that Krishna is understood by devotional service, beginning with the process of surrender. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, one has to think of Krishna always. One has to render loving service to Krishna always. And one always has to worship and bow down before Krishna. But by this process, only can one enter into the kingdom of God without any doubt. One who is enlightened in the mode of goodness by the process of devotional service is freed from the modes of ignorance and passion. In answering King Parikshit's question, Shukadeva Goswami used the word atmane, which indicates the stage of brahminical qualification in which one is allowed to study the Vedic scriptures known as the Upanishads. The Upanishads describe in different ways the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Lord. The absolute truth, the Supreme Lord, is called Nirguna. Now, this is an interesting point. Nirguna technically means without qualities. So the impersonalists think, well, the absolute truth ultimately doesn't have qualities. But we understand the word nirguna means without the three modes of material nature, the gunas. That does not mean he has no qualities, only because he has qualities that the conditioned living entities can have qualities. I talked about that before. The purpose of studying the Upanishads is to understand the transcendental qualities of the absolute truth, as opposed to the material qualities of ignorance, passion, and goodness. That is the way of Vedic understanding. Great sages like the four Kumaras headed by Sanaka followed these principles of Vedic knowledge and came gradually from impersonal understanding to the platform of personal worship of the Supreme Lord. Kumaras and also Shukadeva Goswami. Of course, the Kumaras became absorbed in the personal form of the Lord when they smelled the tulsi leaves and flowers offered at the lotus feet of the Lord when they went to Vaikuntha to see the Lord. It is therefore recommended that we must follow the great personalities. Shukadeva Goswami is also one of the great personalities, and his answer to the inquiry of Maharaj Parikshit is authorized. One who follows in the footsteps of such great personalities surely walks very easily on the path of liberation and ultimately goes back home, back to Godhead. That is the way of perfecting this human form of life. Shukadeva Goswami continued to speak to Parikshit Maharaj, my dear king. He said, in this regard, I shall narrate a nice story. This story is important because it is in connection with Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This narration is a conversation between Narayan Rishi and the great sage, Narada. Very, very nice. Narayan Rishi still resides in Badarik Ashrama and is accepted as an incarnation of Narayana. Badarik Ashrama is situated in the northernmost part of the Himalayan mountains and is always covered with snow. Religious Indians still go to visit this place during the summer season when the snowfall is not very severe. Of course, there's a upper section of Badarik Ashrama which we cannot reach with these material bodies. So these people go to Badarik Ashrama and then they to go to the actual upper portion because it is transcendental. Once when Narada, the great devotee and ascetic among the demigods, was traveling among different planets, he desired to meet the ascetic Narayan personally in Badarik Ashrama and offer him respects. This great sage incarnation of Godhead, Narayana Rishi, has been undergoing great penances and austerities from the very beginning of the creation to teach the inhabitants of Bharatavarsha how to attain the highest perfectional stage of going back to Godhead. His austerities and penances are exemplary practices for the human being. The incarnation of God, Narayan Rishi, was sitting among many devotees in the village known as Kalapagrama. Of course, these were not ordinary sages sitting with him, and the great sage Narada also appeared there. After offering his respects to Narayana Rishi, Narada asked him exactly the same question King Parikshit asked Shukadeva Goswami. Then the Rishi answered by following in the footsteps of his predecessors. He narrated a story of how the same question had been discussed on the planet known as Janaloka, which is above the Swargaloka planets, these are heavenly planets such as the moon and Venus. On this planet, great sages and saintly persons live, and they once discussed the same point regarding the understanding of Brahman and his real identity. Very good. The great sage Narayana began to speak. My dear Narada, he said, I shall tell you a story which took place long, long ago. There was a great meeting of the denizens of the heavenly planets, and almost all the important brahmacharis, such as the four Kumaras, Sanandana, Sanaka, Sanatana, and Sanat Kumara attended. Their discussion was on the subject matter of understanding the absolute truth, Brahman. You were not present at that meeting because you had gone to see my expansion, Aniruddha, who lives on the island of Shvetadvipa. In this meeting, all the great sages and brahmacharis very elaborately discussed the point about which you have asked me, and their discussion was very interesting. It was so delicate that even the Vedas were unable to answer the intricate questions raised. Narayan Rishi told Naradaji that the same question Naradaji had raised had been discussed in that meeting on Janaloka. This is the way of understanding through the parampara or disciplic succession. Maharaj Parikshit questioned Shukadeva Goswami, and Shukadeva Goswami referred the matter to Narada, who had in the same way questioned Narayan Rishi, who would put the matter to still higher authorities on the planet of Janaloka, where it was discussed among the great Kumaras, Sanatan, Sanaka, Sanandana, and Sanat Kumar. These four brahmacharis, the Kumaras, are recognized scholars in the Vedas and other Shastras. Their unlimited volumes of knowledge, backed by austerities and penances, are exhibited by their sublime, ideal character. They are very amiable, and gentle in behavior. For them, there's no distinction between friends, well-wishers, and enemies. Being transcendently situated, such personalities as the Kumaras are above all material considerations and are always neutral in respect to material dualities. In the discussions held among the four brothers, one of them, namely Sanandana, was selected to speak, and the other brothers became the audience to hear him. Now listen, Sanandana said, after the dissolution of the whole cosmic manifestation, the entire energy and the whole creation in its nucleus form enter into the body of the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. The Lord at that time remains asleep for a long time. And when there is again necessity of creation, the Vedas personified assembled around the Lord began to glorify him, describing his wonderful transcendental pastimes exactly like servants of a king. When the king is asleep in the morning, the appointed reciters come around his bedroom and begin to sing of his chivalrous activities, and while hearing of his glorious activities, the king gradually awakens. The Vedic reciters of the personified Vedas sing thus: "O unconquerable Lord, you are the supreme personality. No one is equal to you or greater than you. No one can be more glorious in his activities. All glory is unto you. All glory is unto you. By your own transcendental nature, you fully possess all six opulences. As such, you are able to deliver all conditioned souls from the clutches of Maya. O Lord, we fervently pray that you kindly do so. All the living entities, being your parts and parcels, are naturally joyful, eternal, and full of knowledge. But due to their own faults, they imitate you by trying to become the supreme enjoyer. Thus, they dissipate your supremacy and become offenders. And because of their offenses, your material energy has taken charge of them." Wow. That's another evidence that we came from the spiritual realm. Thus, their transcendental qualities of joyfulness, bliss, wisdom have been covered by the clouds of three material qualities. This cosmic manifestation made of the three material qualities is just like a prison house for the conditioned souls. Remember that prison, Durga. The conditioned souls are struggling very hard to escape from material bondage, and according to their different conditions of life, they have been given different types of engagement. But since all engagements are based on knowledge supplied by you, the conditioned souls can execute pious activities only when you mercifully inspire them to do so. Therefore, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot surpass the influence of the material energy. Actually, we as personified Vedic knowledge are always engaged in your service by helping the conditioned souls understand you. The prayer of the Vedas personified illustrates that the Vedas are meant for helping the conditioned souls to understand Krishna. All the Shrutis means personified Vedas, or personified Vedas, offered glories to the Lord again and again singing Jaya, Jaya. This indicates that the Lord is most glorious. Of all his glories, the most important is his causeless mercy upon the conditioned souls and reclaiming them from the clutches of Maya. Remember this. This is actually quite interesting. The last question. I'll outline it. Of all his glories, the most important is his causeless mercy upon the conditioned souls and reclaiming them from the clutches of Maya. There are unlimited numbers of living entities in different varieties of bodies, some moving and standing in one place, and the conditioned life of these living entities is due only to their forgetfulness of their eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of God and forgetfulness. When the living entity wants to lord it over the material energy by imitating the position of Krishna, he is immediately captured by the material energy and, according to his desires, offered one variety of the 8,400,000 different kinds of bodies. Oh my God. Although undergoing the threefold miseries of material existence, the illusion living entity falsely thinks himself the master of all he surveys. Under the spell of the material energy represented by the three material qualities, the living entity is so entangled that he's not able to become free unless he is graced by the Supreme Lord. In other words, only by the Lord's mercy. The living entity cannot conquer the influence of the material modes of nature by his own endeavor, but because the material nature is working under the control of the Supreme Lord, the Lord is beyond his jurisdiction. This material energy of Krishna says, Krishna's my material energy is impossible to overcome, but one who surrenders into me can easily cross beyond it. Except for him, all living entities from Brahma down to the ant are conquered by the contact of material nature. Because the Lord possesses in full the six opulences of wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, he alone is beyond the spell of material nature. Of course, pure devotees are beyond the spell of material nature, but that is because Krishna protects them from the material nature. There's no independent force that someone has independent of Krishna. It's because of their dependence on Krishna. As soon as we are not dependent on Krishna, then we become involved in the material energy again, no matter how elevated we are. Unless the living entity is situated in Krishna consciousness, he cannot approach the Supreme Personality of God. Yet the Lord, by his omnipotency, can dictate from within as a super soul how a living entity can gradually come to him, even while performing his ordinary work. In other words, as the super soul, Krishna guides us to the Guru, and we get that information, and then internally we become more and more aware what the super soul wants us to do through our intelligence, and ultimately we meet the super soul face to face. As the Lord advises in the Bhagavad Gita, whatever you do, do it for me. Whatever you eat, first offer to me. Whatever charity you want to give, first give it to me. And whatever austerities and penances you want to perform them for me. Yat kurosi yadasnasi yajdawashi yata pashashi kontia tat kurushwa madarpanam. In this way, the karmis are directed gradually to develop Krishna consciousness. Similarly, that's called karma yoga, where you engage things in Krishna's service, and you haven't really come to the stage of doing it out of love, but at least you're doing it. Similarly, Krishna directs the philosophers to approach him by gradually discriminating between Brahman and Maya, for at last, when one is mature in knowledge, he surrenders unto Krishna. Again, Mohanam Janmanamante Gavaman Prabhajadeva Sadeva Sarvamidisa Mahamusadurlava, also Manasanam, Marshanam, Sahasreshu Kastya Yatati Siddhya, Yatatam Apisanam Kastyapam Veti Tatvata. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita after many births, that's what I just quoted, the wise philosopher surrenders unto me. The yogis are also directed to concentrate their meditation on Krishna within the heart. And by such a continuous process of Krishna consciousness, they can also become free from the clutches of material energy. The devotees, however, engage in devotional service with love and affection from the very beginning, and therefore the Lord personally directs them so they can approach him without difficulty or deviation. This is stated in the Bhagavad Gita. Only by the grace of the Lord can the living entity understand the exact position of Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. So we're going to stop sharing now. We're going to allow you to ask some questions about the philosophical points that were made here. So you can unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand. Very important chapter to understand the Krishna conscious philosophy. If you understand this chapter, you understand everything about the Krishna conscious philosophy. You can raise your hand, you can type in the chat window, or unmute yourself. So who has a question? Now it's your opportunity. You know, philosophy is not so much of a story, but it's a philosophical exposition. Okay, here's a question in the chat window. How do we meet the super soul face to face? Well, there's step-by-step procedure to do that. First, we desire to understand who Krishna is. We desire to get out of the material world. Then Krishna send us to the spiritual master. Spiritual master is the external manifestation of super soul. Then, under the direction of the spiritual master, we practice Krishna consciousness, and then by practicing Krishna consciousness, our intelligence and mind become purified, and then that becomes a manifestation of the super soul. Actually, Prabhupada said the intelligence is the form direction of the super soul, and that's the second way we can appreciate the super soul. And then when we become fully purified, without any anarthas, then we actually meet the super soul face to face in the form that we have been worshiping him. In other words, whether we meet the super soul in the form of Krishna playing the flute, or we meet the super soul in the form of, a four-handed super soul, that depends on how we've been focusing on the Lord. And of course, the deity is also non-different than the super soul, the deity of Krishna, not the demigods, of course. And so we can also meet the super soul in that way. But our general progress is from spiritual master's directions, the intelligence, manifestation of super soul, and then ultimately seeing the super soul face to face. So that's the general process. Okay, good question.
Hare Krishna, Swami.
Hare Krishna. So you have a question?
How does Krishna help the living entity who is not a human being? I mean, the dog, the cat. He has no feeling for Krishna. So how does Krishna, helps him get?
Krishna gives them intelligence on how to be a dog and a cat. Because it's not that a dog or a cat is unintelligent, except their intelligence is generally in the mode of ignorance with a touch of passion. So Krishna gives them the ability to understand things that are consistent with their particular body. So in that way, Krishna's interacting even with the dog and the cat. Idami buddhi yogam tam. So not exactly that verse, but yayatamam prapajante tam satai bhavajamiyam. And also matak smriti or gyanam 15:15 in the Gita. That Krishna gives every living entity intelligence, forgetfulness, according to their desire, and memory, intelligence, memory, and forgetfulness. Matak smriti or gyanam apohanam cha. So yes, Krishna is there even for the dog and the cat. So the dog basically knows there is a she-dog, and the dog knows what to do.
How does he get Krishna consciousness? How does he evolve from being a dog to become?
There's two ways. One way is the dog gradually goes up, and the next life becomes some species a little higher than dog. In other words, let's say the dog is a street dog, then it becomes a purebred dog after that. I'm just making this up as I go along. And he becomes a Cocker Spaniel, then he becomes a French Poodle. Then after that, what's the highest type of dog? I don't know. But then after that, the dog takes the body of the next highest species of life, which I'm not really familiar with all the gradations like that of the different species of life to that degree. I mean, I do know that human beings are higher than dogs. But a dog, he could move up to another species like a super dog or something. And then anyway, and eventually then he comes to the human species through the body of a monkey or a cow like that, or a tiger. That's one way. Another way is that if you're the dog of a Vaishnava or somehow or other, you have, as a dog, you have heard the holy name from a Vaishnava. Wow. Then you can just immediately take a prasadam from a Vaishnava. Then you can immediately take birth as a human being in your next life. That's another way. So there's at least those two different ways of progressing. But the animals don't regress or go down. The animals progress in one way or the other. Okay, good question. Okay, I see Jagat, you have a question.
Yes, it mentioned that as soon as the living entity desires to lord it over material nature and take the position of Krishna, he takes one of the 8,400,000 species of life. They made it sound like you can go directly from pure transcendence into any species of life without going down through Lord Brahma and gradually degrading.
I think the problem is just speaking generally. First, you have to take birth in some way to accrue karma. And that's why Prabhupada mentioned that there's some indication that the living entity takes birth as Lord Brahma or another living entity in the mode of goodness. That's the essential point. In other words, you don't get really degraded immediately unless you have bad karma, and you can't get bad karma from a lower species of life. Lower species of life, they're suffering or enjoying their previous karma that they accrued in one of the many human species of life, including the demigods, which are like human species of life. Demigods can accrue karma, human beings can accrue karma. But certainly you can't become an animal immediately. Probably speaking generally about that. Thank you for pointing that out. So I guess that's it. Okay, it's time. Thank you all very much. And this is a very philosophical chapter. We will continue with this chapter tomorrow and maybe even the next day until we finish this chapter, and then soon after that we'll finish the whole Krishna book. Okay, thank you very much. All glories to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada.